We would like to welcome our next speaker, Amit Bhasin. And Amit is currently enabling digital transformations strategy at Quality Kiosk, including new platforms development, cross-functional teams to improve overall go-to-market strategy. Amit would be speaking on experience engineering. Yes, as we say that experience really matters in IT and in testing everywhere. So very interesting topic he is going to cover experience engineering. And if you wanted to know more about Amit, so you can go on GTR website and see his video interview. So I will just hand over it to Amit so that he can take it ahead from here. So welcome, Amit. Now the stage is yours.
Yeah, Good morning, everyone. I hope I'm clearly audible.
Yes, you are.
Okay, let me just share my screen first. And as I do that, thank you all for the opportunity, perspective in front of you. And that's really the intention of my presentation today. And hopefully we can have a further, interesting discussion going beyond what I discuss. Is my screen up?
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. So as the norm goes, I'll have to give you a few minutes introduction about who am I, or rather our organization, right? So QualityKiosk Technologies centrally revolves around quality engineering outcomes for our clients. We have, I'm sorry, there's some disturbance. Yeah, thanks. So we have an entire practice around covering the application lifecycle, right from pre-production to production, and of course the consumption of the application as a customer experience.
Sorry, we lost you, Amit.
Yeah, okay. Am I audible now?
Now you are audible.
Okay.
Yes.
So I might have some intermittent connections. Hopefully the slides can guide you, but do let me know if there is any significant droppage. So
Yeah,
if
sure.
I were to look at our, eventual capability, what are we doing with our clients, right? We're enabling experiences across a digital for the experience, around payments, you're making transactions. It could be an experience around buying goods, buying food, some entertainment, clothing, right? Or it could essentially be anything that customers love, right? Which will help them achieve their eventual outcomes, right? And this holds true for any industry, right? Whether it's we work with manufacturing, we work with telecom, we work with banks. If you can find it and seek it, run it across a digital cloud and reach the customer, right? There is some play for us to help customers consume that journey. And that helps us scale across the globe. We work across multiple countries and geographies, and we work with some of the top clients pan India and internationally also, right? Beyond banking, financial services, payments, fintechs, telcos, and even manufacturing industry like automobile. So I'm going to now just rotate forward and segue into what are we really now at the crux of. So in our 20 years of experience, we have kind of smartly segued it from an internal IT defined organization, right, to an external digital experience cloud, right, which effectively means that most of your transactional hops to deliver the application or the experience are going to be outside your IT organization, right? So you're right now managing a lot of technology which is not owned by you. Is one of the core constructs of what we are trying to deliver across a continuous intelligence pipeline. One of the simple reasons for this is, your workloads are shifting out. So if you look at banking industry, wherein 80% of the workloads are traditionally handled by your offline or traditional channels, and 20% right now are probably consumed by pure play online transactional channels, you can easily expect the workloads to, switch up. And this is going to happen. I think some of you saw some massive failures with some of the largest two banks in the past 2-3 weeks. Essentially, it's because of the workload shifting, right? So how are you going to now manage a new architecture, and what are the kind of broader, and I know Rosalind talked very articulately about the QA metrics, what are the kind of eventual deliverables that our clients are asking for, right? Have moved away definitely from a defect engineering capability to an outcome engineering capability, right? Sounds easy, but very tough because you have to go back to the drawing board in many cases, right? And that's where we kind of emphasize your built-in view of quality engineering is actually going to be the central architecture to enable these experiences on an ongoing basis. And of course, using automation and AI principally is going to be the fuel, right? Which will give you both a competitive edge and both a sustainability to do these things. So now, right, what's experience engineering, right? So how does that fit in, right? We've had a lot of buzz-worthy words that have been thrown out, but why do we talk about experience engineering now? Well, because interestingly, if you step back in your lives, either as an operational role or a QA lead or as a product owner, one of the fundamental shifts that is happening is not just the way we do things, but it's fundamentally questioning why do we do it, right? So if you imagine all the metrics that Rosalind presented being good, and if all the metrics were actually feeding into a bad product, right, eventually it doesn't matter, right? You could have an amazing efficiency test pass case. You could have amazing defect leak management. You could, throw up your coverage to about 100%. But if it all tails into a bad product, it really doesn't matter. It's like having an MTTR response, which is amazing for a bad experience. Really don't care. I'd rather have a better experience and have marginal operational metrics which can catch up. And that's what effectively a lot of the startups do, right? They focus on the experience-led engineering first. So how do we reach there, right? So we started with a kind of broader set of waterfall events, right, which dovetailed into an agile perspective, where you actually were trying to re-architect a couple of things. One is the culture, right, and more importantly, the communication workflows, essentially, right? Now what's happening is, if you were to look at an experience-led engineering framework, you would actually be on a constant hill, where first you have to establish an experience baseline. If I were to ask you currently in any of your development projects or any of your delivery life cycles, how many of you start with a certain experience lifestyle, right? Do you have experience baselining that you do as an event when you start up your release conversations or your sprint or your cataloging of different product buckets that you're going to be working on? Do you have some kind of an experience baseline? That's a question to the audience right now. Do you measure anything at the start itself? If anyone's interested to answer.
Really not.
So yeah, it's tough, right? It's a very vague thing. Now, following on to that, if you don't have an experience baseline, how do you know that what's the future state of that app or that product that I'm delivering that I need to aim for? The future state cannot be test, right? It cannot be running QA. In fact, there is a sprint mafia, right, as I call it, because you designed the product ambition or the experiences wrongly, you end up doing more sprints, right? Let's be honest, right? And that's why we get comfortable with the concept sometimes, but that's not really the leaning for Agile, right? The leaning for Agile was to be moving forward with forward sprints. They were not supposed to be retrospective sprints, fixing things that were never to be fixed or never really fulfilling a product ambition or an outcome, right? So another thing that you have to look at is that you could be doing this entire engineering just for one individual. Can you be that flexible? Can you be that agile? It could be for a group of individuals, right? Or it could be for entire communities. Now that really is complicated right now. And this is what actually is being served. Frankly, this is going to be common for any industry, whether it's a car manufacturer, whether it's a banking, or whether it's, of course, Netflix, right? And Netflix is going to be a case I'm going to discuss today. I'll talk a few of the production and outcomes that they're doing. Some of the frameworks that are available to support experience-led engineering are, of course, like you can still consistently work on the ODA practices, right? They really strengthen still experience-led engineering. But some of them have to be basically on how do you actually visualize and align around goals, right? So typically the mantra has been teams are very eager to jump in and they have this false alignment notion that we are aligned internally. So this illusion of agreement that comes actually misses the core. Do you have a clear view of experience, right? Because that is the input and the output that eventually will feed the growth or the outcomes that really matter, right? So imagine 2-3 decades, the largest organization in the world with the largest money to throw and the largest technology companies, right, supporting them. Why didn't they build the best products? Think about it. Think about an upstart startup coming up with no domain experience building better products because their experience-led architecture was very critical, right? A simple example could be, if I have to be responsive to a certain customer use case, my entire database has to be different, right? My database architecture changes. Or if I have to have a very strong API or what we call the edge services delivery framework, the way I respond and accept integration across third-party dependencies has to be day one, my core capability. So now the question is, if we assume that we are improving now the development cycle, are we building great products? Is the customer, right, or the user a direct stakeholder in development cycle, right? If it's not, you're missing out a big opportunity in terms of what the product is, right? Currently, whether it's a fast-moving content delivery platform like Netflix or a search platform for Google or a new fintech platformer, the product engineering lifeline, right? They decide what kind of coding would you align with, what kind of data customization that you do, and what kind of outside-in collaboration is inbuilt into your engineering side, right? So the mantra being experience, right, is no longer a differentiator for a product. Old way of thinking that I'll add an ingredient to top up to make my product better. No, because experience is the product. Yeah. Because if you look at it, the stacks are getting much more decomplex, or demystified. And the only layer for you to fight as a business to deliver a better application or a better product outcome is going to be, what kind of experience engineering have you inculcated into the product to really matter, right? And that's really eventually the goal, right? To set up this kind of a discussion. And why is it important now? Well, one of the obvious data points that you can always find out is, well, data is not scarce, right? And if you look at it, the data point from Syntef when they did a research is that almost 90% of all data generated has been in the last 2 to 3 years, right? This report is a year old, in fact. Now, if you consider that, out of this, if you see the blue and the red markers, right, what's that? So that's unstructured and structured data. If you ask me, ask yourself, how many times do you use that massive scale of unstructured data in your quality life cycle or your delivery life cycle or your DevOps, right? It's very less. But if you look at the incident of the data, it's almost 90% of all data generated is unstructured, right? And that's the critical pie wherein we lose out a lot of the experience outcomes or KPIs that we were to set in the first place, or the measurability index has to be led based on those unstructured elements which need to be consolidated into your experience pipeline, right? And that's where you have an entire economy of don't manufacture the underlying product. It's fine. They own the experience that delivers that product, right? And that's why for them the experience is the product, right? And this matters a lot because fundamentally these are the kind of goals that will actually align with your ability to, number one, build the right engineering life cycle. And the second thing is scale something which is actually customer delivery model, which is helping business, right? Now, the number one use case that we currently work on is just capturing experiences, of course, right? And then, of course, your ability to influence those experiences, modulate that, or create new experiences is what matters to business, right? So one way could be, let's say, I'll just hop out, is that for me, the customer voice is very important. So for me, my ability to, for example, continuously engage with the experiences of a customer, measure them across various metrics. It could be a general quality of service. It could be the deviation with what experience on the application is a business impact versus a technical impact. That's very important, right? Because both are different divergent set of data. And then, of course, how does it actually impact across platform, right? I should be able to continuously see the customer voice engaging with my services or my application and being able to identify points of interaction which need to be improved. And these are the ones that actually convert into eventual user stories or actually convert into a new development sprint, right? Which is a priority for me, right? Beyond any other priority. I could do it specifically based on just one platform and could engineer the entire life cycle of data by observability of those metrics, right? So those are some simple ways. But what's really important is that the KPIs can, move between the operational threshold to external thresholds very easily. So operational could be, typically you have like a fastest time taken to answer a customer query. It could be the first response, right? First call response. You have handling time. But then if you see on the customer side, and I think one person correctly mentioned, NPS is very important, right? And you have all these other metrics available. But what's the point of it if you are just capturing it as a result of something which is not even aligned with the experience, right? You're actually probably running the same engineering life cycle, but capturing metrics which don't really tally in, right? So if you look at someone like a Netflix, for them, they first actually create a customer experience baseline, which actually influence the product. So if Aditya says, he likes, horror thrillers, they'll actually, look at the relevance of that user group, create the category. And then, of course, when they have to, hire content, they even use the user inputs to decide which actors are casted or cast into those, programs, right? And then that goes back to the customer, right? So if you have such a continuous life cycle on just the product layer, your engineering life cycle has to match up, right? It cannot be so divergent. And that's where the architecture gets modified. So for day one, for someone like a Netflix, their architecture being able to respond to these kind of a business and life cycle of engagement was fundamental. And I think that's what really the goal is with experience-led engineering. And that's what you need to fundamentally align with. And it has a larger stakeholder participation. These are not easy, but these are fundamental, because the organizations which have articulated and demonstrated experience-led architecture are the ones which are going to sustain, frankly. Others will not even survive, right? So now we have kind of segued out from application-led engineering to product engineering and now to experience engineering. And what you want to achieve out of this is you should be able to not use architecture for technical or technology to shape behavior, right? Netflix is, for example, sticking to the case study, is a great example, right? Their ambition was to create an architecture which will force the developers, force the QA and the operational owners to work on more chaotic sets of data, right? But what happens is with that chaotic set of data, you have more engagement points that come up, right? Which effectively moves the entire product engineering lifecycle forward positively, right? Another thing that I wanted to touch upon is, people might get confused. They would say that, we had design-led engineering, right? Is this a new buzzword which is on top of it? Not really, right? So design-led still continues, right? In fact, it's a key component of your experience architecture, but it's more of an approach and it's more internalized, right? How do you actually create a symbiosis between the internal stakeholders, your DevOps, product engineering, and the business stakeholders to actually align with the outcomes which have been discussed, from an external delivery perspective, but are going to be modulated internally. But when you look at experience, right, you're really literally looking at, the companies that care about, what customers should experience as an eventual outcome, of which, your design-led is a component, right? Your data-led practices are another key component, right? Your chaotic, engineering or how modular you are by choice is very important, right? For having a key architecture for experience engineering. And your refresh cycles are not going to be, something that is going to happen across a build. The build cycles are different. Your refresh cycles for all the data that you consume to improve the experience has to be continuous, right? Because if the refresh cycle is continuous, your experiences will actually need to be modulated on an ongoing basis. And you already see that, right? You use a lot of applications which are custom UI for you, only your, and that's the experience that you want, right? So there has to be very key technology and experience symbiosis, right? And these are the kind of application-led blocks that influence things like API-led development, which is becoming very popular now, right? This is the Netflix stack at a high level, but essentially what we're going to have in the future is you would not want to own the entire code. There is no point in reinventing the entire value chain of code internally because I'd like to own it. That's gone, right? You would rather be modular by choice. You would actually have different cohorts of code which integrate through either a native API-led architecture or something on an open cloud, right? And you would be able to deliver the experience that matters more, and that's more relevant. Right? So you would have to be much more flexible in that regard. A lot of organizations are just getting aware about these things, but they are not really adopting it aggressively as a business deployment architecture, right? Similarly with data deployment, right? Forget about every other technology construct linked to AI and ML. Just think about it. With all the data available in the next few years, what's the number one use case? It's going to be capturing experiences and delivering new experiences to customers in real time, right? Nothing else. So if that is going to be the fuel, you need to actually have an architecture that can actually run that kind of fuel, right? So you cannot have a Fiat engine running, a Ferrari kind of performance, right? That's basically the ask. So you have to now gear up and build an architecture which can deliver something that Netflix calls relentless experience. So I've borrowed some of the inputs from Vasant. He's a Netflix QA lead globally. And some of the things that are critical, and I'm just demonstrating these for your benefit. Frankly, none of these are parallelly to any organization, but some of these are adoptable at certain scale. So one of the things they have moved to lock, stock, and barrel is complete experience-led engineering on the production layer. So their production layer QA is what defines quality for them. That's line, right? Because they figured out that you cannot stitch up all the loose ends, and production is only the environment, and having an SRE that works aggressively towards those goals is important. And for an organization like Netflix, and interestingly, not so different from the other organizations also, the edge engineering is going to be pivotal, right? So how much of service assimilation and how much of journey assimilation you can manage and run test cycle around the edge objects is more critical for you. And for them, of course, it's more of a mission critical API architecture, right? And this is going to become more important for other organizations, right? Another thing that they've done is by shifting to production, they are looking at solving the problem of complex dependencies which are not internal but external, so they can actually work with non-static distributed systems. They want to manage the rate of change, which is very critical for them, right? In fact, that's their lifeline. And another thing they wanted to figure out is that by deleveraging most of the QA from internal pre-production, they were able to actually normalize a lot of the testing architecture and tools, because now they were running more global or homogeneous environments, which didn't require a lot of custom tools to be developed, where they could actually be sharing the metrics reliably across different partners. Yeah. Any questions?
Amit, we are collecting all the questions, so if we have time, we can take it up once you are done.
Cool. So now, if they were embracing this entire, experience-led engineering, production became the obvious choice, because that's where the consumption happens at the most criticality. So their ability to mimic customer patterns was very important. So every day you have thousands of real-world testers who are setting up account in a random manner, and this is all black box, right? So essentially, none of the dependence. In fact, there have been complaints of some of the providers on the broadband internet side that these testers are spamming out the cloud and creating some kind of a non-linear experience. But that's the objective, right? So they actually do this fully automated. They do this completely distributed in a non-linear pattern globally. So and that's where their entire architecture for their AB environment has been built. So there is a Netflix, which is the one that you consume. There is a AB Netflix that is done for testing out these environments on a real-time basis, on an ongoing basis, right? So that's where they have been able to support their experience-led outcomes based on these kind of a scalable architecture, right? And that's where the other point I want to emphasize is that if you're trying to get into the experience-led game, your ability to scale that experience as an architecture through the value chain is very important. So if you're doing something right now, stop and revisit it. That is it scalable to 5x or 10x? If it's not, you're probably already going to go to the drawing board right now. That's very important. Another thing that you see is how they actually manage the entire resourcing, right? So for them, how they appropriate different metrics on the device to server API is more important for them rather than the internal operational systems to the API, right? So they have continuous flow is inbound, and their ability to actually have an entire service layer dedicated. This is not their normal, right? This is dedicated architecture only for experience testing that they do on an ongoing basis, right? And of course, you can have a larger use cases. You can actually add multiple layers on this. But if you see for them, they've actually segregated points of interaction where they have the edge device architecture being the ones where they're only expressing, and everything on the API consumes the rest of the test cases that they have to do, right? So coming back to the focal point, right, eventually it has to deliver the outcomes. So obviously, one of the easiest way for them is they have to actually create new experiences based on this architecture. It can only be just testing the ones that are. So one of them, of course, is how do you custom deliver a profile to a user which you currently use. Another interesting one is how can you refresh the experience, right, for the same product, right? So as you observe the customers are having a fatigue, how can you reinvigorate? Yeah. Hello.
Yeah, just reminding that 5 minutes to go.
Yeah, we're on the last run. So refresh that experience. Now, how do you, as an operational owner, a QA owner, right? And these are in front of you, for example, permutations of the same product, right, being created, and you need to actually measure the impact of the experience and not just test the delivery of that experience, that whether the functionality was there and was the customer able to access something. No, you need to also see, for example, that what experience is actually bringing better outcomes for the user. And that's where you have one of the most interesting products that has come out of their experience-led engineering approach is something like Play Something. So they know that they have a finite content, and how much content can you add every day. One opportunity that they found that customers do is heavy, intensive search-based, content seeking, right? What if you could actually build a product based on those responses, which could actually search something random for you and give it to you based on the data that's been collected around your profile, right? So these are some of the things that end up tailing into the product life cycle, right? Which is eventually the core goal. And one thing I'd like to definitely say that is within the game, there's no absolute metric, right? There's nothing which is, let's say, 100 percentile. It's all relative, right? It could be relative to your peers, right? It could be relative to the product, or it could just be relative to the time, right? So time is also very important. Seasonality is very important. So your ability to have an architecture which is able to manage these variations is very critical, right? And relentlessly capturing the right experience metrics is obviously key. But more importantly, these cannot be captured as an afterthought after you have run your entire delivery lifecycle. These have to be the thought of your delivery lifecycle, right? What if you could virtualize the entire product and then baseline your experience and then start in terms of what architecture works best for us, right? And that's where the experience first approach works. So one of the things that QualityKiosk does is, we work on both sides of the operational and the customer experience layer. For us to navigate that seamlessly, right, for the customers is very critical. And sometimes we do that for some elements also for experience, right? It could be those small micro transactions that users are doing, right? Or it could be some larger experience transaction and how are we actually as a quality engineering organization supporting those kind of outcomes for the user, right? So these things have to tail in eventually to a product led outcome or product led engineering, which is built on an experience led architecture. So with that, I'll kind of stop here and pause. There are some points I've left on the slide, which can be of question or for note, where I emphasize that you should have a lot of on-field developers right, which I see very less, or they should be near field, wherein they are absolutely at the cusp of what the customer is experiencing. I don't see that a lot still. You should consume more unstructured data, right? Experience enablement is more important than visual polish, very clearly. A lot of people assume visual polish, no. And then aggressive prototyping collaboration is required. I see a lot of collaboration on the QA metrics being passed around. I don't see a lot of collaboration on the prototyping, right? Wherein every stakeholder should have a prototyping input, frankly. And many times I don't see those being even collaborated on. And then, of course, cataloging all experiences, even the bad ones, is very important, because that actually becomes your IP of knowledge that you use to engineer the next life cycle. So thank you. I hope this was a good experience for you. Could put some perspective, both from a business side and not just technology. So any questions I can answer post or now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Amit, for this insightful and very power-packed session. And it was really good to hear from you. We have some questions on Slido. I will just share my screen and we can take the questions. I think my screen is visible now. I'm going on Slido. So here we have questions from Aditya and Dhananjay. How can we use the failure incidents reports on the social media as a user experience? And the second questions in that line, easy for Netflix and Amazon to do. How do we do this for insurance organizations or banking for that matter? Can you please give some examples?
Yeah, so we have actually done it for those sectors specifically. So here's the great thing, right? With customer voice, it doesn't have to be your customer. So I'll frankly tell you, go after that Amazon customer, because Amazon is going after the insurance customer. So in India, you might be aware Amazon has applied for insurance license. The reason being is the group or categories of customers are not owned by any product, right? They're there. It's only that what experiences they are doing, which you need to track. So your ability to validate, first of all, your product through the customer experiences is the first opportunity through customer voice, right, that you can do. That great, I did a product, I delivered a new release. Did it really move the delta in terms of what the customer expected, right? And you can actually capture a lot of insight. We capture a bug definition. We even capture product feature definitions from users, which actually surprises a lot of our customers who have made a lot of effort to build some outcome, which is completely not in alignment with the customer is actually experiencing, right? So that's one of the good things you can do easily. More importantly, if you ask for us, the real reason we want to track those metrics is that I may actually come across a new product sprint that I never imagined, which could be a P1, right? So prioritizing your product sprints is very critical, because you might be solving 20 things. If you know the customer pain areas are resident on 3 things, solve that first, because practically you cannot do everything in your catalog in one consumption life cycle. So I think that's another use case of the data. And we actually build platforms which can first capture the data, because we advise the client, and in insurance specifically, that these are your clients, right? These are not some aliens, right? These are your future potential clients. They are your existing clients also. Your ability to engage and own that data is your life cycle of product engineering. So that's how we actually kind of relate to this. But many use cases. For lack of time, I'll probably stop here.
Yes, so we can take up one more question. It is like for B2C, it is easy to capture data from large audience. How can we apply these concepts to B2B applications? And I think this is in the second. Is it suitable for products where SLAs were very tight, such as payment solutions?
Okay, so I'll start with the last part. So with payments, the approach we take is we take a journey-led approach. So we actually stitch up the entire journey of the payment, because payments is slightly complicated because it has multiple hops, which is PSP, the PG, you have a OTP layer, and then of course you have the issuing. So there you actually you need to have a continuous CIP around the entire journey, right? And you show your observability proactively around the incidents of droppages is very critical, because they are very dynamic, right? But more going to the first part of your question, when you ask that these are, could you just repeat the first part of the question so that I don't get it wrong?
For B2C, it is easy to capture data from large audience. How can we apply this concept to B2B applications?
So interestingly, the only difference is in the weightage of the user, right? In B2B, if you look at the entire consumption cycle, if you cannot get it from a large pool of customers, you actually have to create the consumption cycle. In fact, even in B2C, so in Netflix, they have this entire army of users, right, which are AI, bot-led, people-led. But prototyping the wireframes is very critical. I think with B2B, if you get the wireframe engagement right at day one, half the problems are solved. I think a lot of the B2B products kind of let off because they feel that they're using a more more matured product, so they don't have to be more dynamic in the experience. It's a big mistake because the same guy who is the CEO of an organization could be a B2B user, but he could just be a dad consuming Netflix. So some of those things still hold good, right? So if login is an experience, right?
Yeah.
How remarkably different would it be for an insurance company and for Amazon? That's it. It's login. So some of those component-led experiences are common, but if you ask me, you have to just change the weightages and you have to do different prototyping for the user, and that's an entire different science around how we do it. But yeah, it's more critical if you ask me because the weight of transaction is very heavy, so your cost of failure is ridiculous.
Okay. Thank you so much for answering these questions. Rest questions will be sending you. In interest of time, we cannot take more questions. Rest questions will be sending you, and you can answer. Then we can post on LinkedIn and other platforms. So thank you so much for
Thanks for your patient hearing, guys.
And it was a really great session.